spirit coming to know itself as itself. So that's just an example of a concept of an opposition of concepts residing on the side of an opposition. Okay, another one, formalism and empiricism. Those are two different poles, and they seem to be irresolvably in conflict. But Hegel says that formalism always wins, not wins in the sense that it is just like it's the bee's knees, but that, and we should always just kind of defer to formalism solely, but that the very split between formalism and empiricism, between form and content, is inscribed onto the flesh of forms. The very split between forms and content is a formal split. It is inscribed into forms. It is inherently formal. One of the two poles wins out. And when I say wins out, what I mean by wins out is that it has the difference already inside of itself. And negativity, for Hegel, is that difference as such. Negativity is the irresolvable difference between substance and itself. Subjectivity is pure negativity. Subjectivity is the eternal self-overcoming of all concepts. A human being never falls into whatever finite contours that you place them into. A human being, or what did he call it? A vital becoming, or a living substance. That's it. A living substance, as the movement of self-positing or the mediation of itself and its becoming other to itself, is negativity. It's pure negativity, where it doesn't matter what like universal concept you put it into. All universals are universally flawed, right? And that's what's good about them. There's this capacity within subjectivity as pure negativity to be the engine of the self-overcoming of whatever container it's put into. And in that sense, that's why he follows that discussion of subject and substance and whatever up with truth is not some original or immediate unity, which I think a lot of people accuse him of saying. But he's very clear here that it's not a true original unity. People think that he's like describing this beautiful unfolding unity in the great wheel of samsara or some whatever. Like, he's saying like, no, that's not truth. Like, it's not an original unity that we need to go back to. And it's not this immediate unity that we need to fall into. It's the coming to be of the thing itself in the form of a circle that presupposes its end. And a circle that presupposes its end, all circles presuppose their end. Their end is where they started. But for a circle to presuppose its end in the coming to be of itself as a subject, that subject's pure negativity, moving circularly, presupposing where it will end, it cannot hit that same starting point in one go. It has to miss that starting point because it is negativity. It has to miss that starting point, and at the very least, as the most basic, minimal structure of the movement of a concept within the realm of being, it has to move again. The first move is always the wrong choice. The second move, the second choice, is the only place where we can start to make the right choice. And that's why Hegel defers to the inside internal eight. Maybe not yet, but he describes the inside internal or inverted eight is the infinity symbol. And it's the circle moving not in 360 degrees of angular motion, but in 720 degrees of angular motion. Oh my God, it's all coming together. So this negativity is the substance of, I'm not going to say the substance, excuse me. Negativity is subject, and it is the thing that all positivity is inscribed onto. And for that reason, he argues that the world is ironic. And there's an ironic character to everything that we do. There's a negative character to everything that we say and that everything that we experience. But anyway, that's okay. I'm done talking. Please, somebody else.
I like that, Sean, you brought up the fruit flower analogy, and I found that very helpful too. So in that analogy, would the negative then be the bulb, or would it be this future flower that it has not yet come to be?
The negative, I mean, there are some people who describe the negative as what is not. And if you were to say that, and that's something that to me gets into the realm of psychoanalysis. And in psychoanalysis, if you talk about the negative as what is not, then we're talking about the bulb or the thing that it's whatever, right? But I think that the negativity that's present in the discussion of the stages of the plant, by the way, I think that it's pretty obvious. I don't know if I have to state this, but I just want to clarify just to make sure. The plant stages analogy was a comparison between the development of a flower in some sort of beautiful he's being really like ironic, I think, at least at the very beginning of the preface. He starts with saying like, you can barely say anything important in a preface, all right? So fuck me. Anyway, here's a preface. So let's talk about plants. Okay, so they're kind of like a unity. And he's like, okay, let's look at this progressive unfolding of a unity. Oh shit, this is cool. You have this seed that turns into a sprout, that turns into a thing, a bud that blooms. Oh my God. And he says, this is very similar to the way that we look at systems of philosophy through history. I think that the primary critique that he is mounting within that, and I'll get to the negativity thing in a second, is that the stages of the flower, the stages of the development of the flower are like, it's like different philosophical systems through history that are establishing themselves, saying, okay, maybe everything's made of water. No, it's made of just atoms. Oh, well, the atoms come from the void, and blah, 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 blah. And then you get structurals and post-structurals and all that. And then we get into a mode, and he talks about this like immediately after in his discussion of edification. But he's like, this is seeing the plant as this self-murderous beast that is constantly lopping parts off of itself and committing self-sacrifices to Agnew or whomever for like growth. And he's like, well, that's one part of the story, but it totally misses the unifying geist of the progression of the plant. But that unifying geist is a disunity. It's a unity through disunity. It's a unity that is present in the flower through the flower's negative relation to itself. I almost said negative. Its negative relation to itself. And what I mean when I say negative relation to itself is that, in a way, I would give some credit to the people that I was just mocking, that in like, and he says this, he's like, in some sense, in some limited sense, the sprout kills the seed, and the blooming flower kills the sprouting seedling, and the blossoming flower kills the blooming flower, right? And in that sense, that's the negativity that I see there. But that negativity is like, that's like a joke. That's like a ha-ha. That's like not even a killing. That's not a negation. That's like, or it is, but you see there's a really weird ironic dual aspect to what's going on there right from the start with the preface. But that's, I don't know if that made any sense, but that's kind of what I think of when I think of what the negativity is in that analogy.
Yeah, I feel like, and maybe I'm wrong, but when I'm interpreting that in light of what you're saying, like, I think that it seems like the negativity also is the fact that so in this analogy he's making with the flower, you say the self-consciousness is sort of blooming in human history, or whatever, the history of philosophy and all that. And wherever, it's like whenever you think that you've got a picture of reality or whatever, you kind of do for that time and place, but by the time that you have that map, that cognitive map or something, it's already outdated. So it's like it's always negated, but you don't, if that makes sense, it's always being kind of undermined in like throughout time or something. So like the more sure you are of reality, the less sure you should be, because now it's done with. Like you've had that picture and now it's time to go further or something.
Yeah, I think one way of kind of understanding negativity, so he connects it with the idea of subjectivity, the subject. And I think one way to kind of see the distinction is, he has the whole being in itself thing, which is kind of like the subject, and then being for itself, which is more like the object. And I think what he's saying is there's always a kind of disconnection or an asymmetry between those two. In a sense, so one image that I get that I think kind of clarifies it is, okay, I have my own subjective experience. And then I can look in a mirror and see myself as an object, or someone can I'm looking at myself right now and seeing that, okay, there's a camera, picking up some light from my image, reflecting back, going through a bunch of digital processing, and now it's on my screen and I'm looking at it. That's basically me as an object in this kind of mediated sense. But there's a difference between my own full subjective experience and that object that I'm looking at right now. And I think that disconnection is kind of that idea of negativity and difference that he's talking about. So I think that's one way to see it, and that it's some kind of I think the idea of asymmetry, I don't know, kind of pops out to me as something like that. But that's how I saw it. Yeah, so on page 24, about halfway down, there's a pretty good description of it in terms of, he says it's a kind of, in part, as a simple differentiating, as the self and knowing as such. So it's kind of interesting that he says that. So he also says, yeah, it's an inequality. Is the differentiating per se. So I think that's pretty important to understand. So another thing that this reminds me of is, so for those of us who are here for Schelling, we did Schelling, he has this one term that really has stuck in my mind, the irreducible remainder. And I see it kind of something sort of like that, in the sense that, okay, no matter how much I try to put something in this fixed, determinate form of understanding, there's always going to be something that I'm leaving out. And that something else that I can't quite give a positive description of, that's that negativity. So at least that was my understanding of it. So yeah.
Hunter, could I do something before you speak? Because then
please.
you might be able to answer some questions that I have. I wanted to read the beginning of section 37 on page 23, and there's some terms here that are some places I'm not sure what he means, that maybe Hunter can help clarify. So at the very beginning of 37, he says the inequality which takes place in consciousness between the I and the substance which is its object is their difference, the negative itself. And one question I have there is, let me read a little bit more before you answer, but when he says the difference between the I and the substance, which is its object, when he says the substance, I don't know if he means like some object of my, this all to me he sounds like he's describing features of intentionality, but that, I don't know if when he says the substance, if he's talking about the substance, like this subject experiences that substance, or if the substance is the substance of the self itself. But so I'm not sure, that's one question I have. But there he says, the negativity is this difference between those two. It can be viewed as the defect of the two, but it is their very soul or what moves them. This is why certain ancients conceived of the void as what moved things and conceiving what moves things as the negative, but they did not yet grasp the negative as the self. However much this negative now initially appears as the inequality between the I and the object, still it is just as much the inequality of the substance with itself. And so there it sounds like he's talking about I and object is like this I and that object, where when he says the inequality of the substance with itself, it sounds like he's talking about subjectivity. What seems to take place outside of the substance to be an activity directed against it is its own doing. and substance shows that it is essentially subject. So it seems like he's talking both about, I mean, is this what, what Kant called a perception? The self taking itself as object. So, when he's talking about the substance shows that it is essentially subject, it sounds like he's talking about the substance of the subject. But then earlier in the sentence, when he talks about the I and the object, or then that seems to be the subject's experience of some other object. Spirit is the object spirit is an object to itself in the way that it is. And the abstract element of immediacy and the separation between knowing and truth is overcome. And so somewhere back in my mind, I had this vague recollection, and I'm not sure it was Hegel, but that there's an idea of truth as the unity of subject and object. So that when the truth is the object of my consciousness being unified with my subjectivity, that's one way of conceiving of truth. But there's this weird fact that as subjective consciousness, this is the intentionality thing, I can only experience something as it is not me, as it is different from me. And so I don't know, I don't understand how all that figures together, but that the negativity, like Sean, or like I think Hunter posted it, subject is pure negativity, that there's something about the difference between the subject and the object, and there's also a difference between the subject and its own substance.
Yes.
And I'm not sure, does negativity refer to both of those, to the difference between subject and object, and also the difference between the subject and its own substantial existence?
Okay, well, there's a lot of things in there to respond to, so I'm going to just try and go lightning speed. Okay, lightning round. Hegel. Okay, so the ultimate example that I can give of like pure negativity in a thing would be the exact opposite of a negative thing. Okay, so the ultimate negation for Hegel is hardly a negative at all. It's the phrase "a rose is a rose," or another one that is in a Leonard Cohen's song that I really like, called "Passing Through." There's a line where Leonard Cohen says, "Man is still a man." And like I make this example a lot, like if we're at a dinner party and I fart or I make some misogynist joke and then I go excuse myself to the bathroom, and then somebody says, "God, what's with that guy?" And then you try to explain for me because you like me and you don't want them to hate me. You say, "Oh, he's Hunter, that's just him, Hunter's just gonna be Hunter." And so a rose is a rose. A man is still a man. These are positive affirmations. It's just self-identity. It's X, it's A equals A. It's a rose is a rose. But when we say that, as soon as we deploy that statement, there is an immediate difference between the two terms. Because when I say the phrase, "a rose is a rose," I am positing two categories. A rose fits into the greater category of rose prime or rose 2. Rose 1 fits into rose 2. Or man, the cosmological almost sort of the genus of man, this sort of ethereal concept of men, yes. There's still a man. All of mankind is still just a bunch of men, and a particular shitty man, like a particular loser. Like it's just a pile of particular losers that are still just men. I'm still a man, and I have my finite limitations, my lacks, my failures, So the ultimate example of negativity is hardly a negativity at all. It's a positive affirmation, the statement that a rose is a rose or a man is a man. So then on to Chase, what you said about the invisible remainder, the indivisible remainder. My apologies. I think that when you said that the indivisible remainder operates as this sort of or the negative operates as this indivisible remainder, I think that you're getting very close to like a Freudo-Lacanian notion of Hegelian negativity, which is negativity as Lacan's notion of objet a, or for Freud, the death drive. So to explain that, it's the X factor, the hidden secret thing about the thing that makes us desire the thing. A desire to know it, desire to hate it, desire to love it, desire to destroy it, whatever. And it's not, you know, this cherry pie. This cherry pie is so sweet and tart and it has this flaky crust. And that is the objet a. That is not the case at all. The objet a is the objective correlate of my subjective experience, which undergirds my phantasmatic approach to experience, which tells me that I actually know that I want that cherry pie at all. Because fuck it, I could just go on a diet right now, or I could kill myself. But instead, my objet a is tricking me into wanting to eat pie instead of kill myself. So this difference between things, this absolute otherness of things gives rise to it opens up a space for the operation of objet a, which fills it in a way. This difference with the thing, this absolute otherness, it makes the other so lovable. It makes the pie so sweet and so alluring. You know, it's its otherness, it's its negativity to us. So then, okay, substance is, so when he's talking about substance, Nevin, this is you now. When you said, is the substance like an object or the self? My basic answer would be twofold. One, I think that it's both. It's substance is subject, and I'll post a 3-hour lecture about this later. Substance is subject in the most radical sense that we can possibly imagine. Okay. So when he says that the thing is its own undoing, right? He talks about like the thing being the cause of its own undoing. I think that he's pointing to like a Hegelian rule that is let's say you have an obstacle in front of you. The solution to that obstacle is already the obstacle itself. Okay. Or actually an inversion. Let's do
Let's you say that, repeat that last sentence again.
The obstacle to the thing is already the solution to overcoming that obstacle. It's the obstacle itself that is the solution to overcoming the obstacle. And an example of this is war. So when we engage in war, and Eric, you might like this because he's talking about nuclear arms races. Let's say that Russia gets a nuke and we are in a situation as the United States saying, oh my God, they have a nuke. What do we do? How do we prepare for war and keep nuclear Armageddon from happening? Oh my God, I've got an idea. Let's build more nukes. That's an awesome, and it's like a joke, like I'm making a funny, but it's like what people go with. That's like the solution that they go with, like pretty much every time. I think that if we face war with the typical solution, right? Actually, an inversion of that same rule, the obstacle is its own solution. The solution is its own obstacle often. So and the only way that we can overcome that solution becoming its own obstacle is to look at this chain of failures and irresolvable contradictions in front of us, take a step back, kind of breathe deeply for a second, and reorient ourselves, move into different coordinates or in a different way, wherein we reverse our defeat and we change the structure or the formal framework within which the problem is occurring at all. So instead of war, oh my God, there's nuclear warheads. We need to get defenses. We need to build to to deter military conflict, we need to become militaristically endowed ourselves. We need to subdue them in a show of might, right? And Hegel would say, no, whoa, the only way to get out of this weird thing of like this guy getting nuclear arms and then you getting nuclear arms and then this arms race, this sort of irresolvable arms race, is for some party to step back, look at the problem, reorient themselves, and enter again into the situation with an altered set of coordinates or an altered path that totally undermines the original problem itself, which would be peace. It should be disarmament, you know. And then the solution of peace becomes its own problem, and we can see that in Greece. But anyway, because that's what he would say is like the closest to true spirits, and we saw how that ended up. So, okay, now the otherness of the subject and the object thing. Enough talking about war and obstacles and shit. I want to talk about subject and object and what the thing. So when he's talking about subject as looking at substance, I think that he's speaking with a dual readability, as he often is, but in the sense that when the subject is looking at the substance, it could both be looking at a pen in front of it, or in an imagined object of what it is, or every time, and like you were saying, Nevin, this is getting to like the intentionality thing. It's like, I am thinking of who I am. I am thinking of my I am thinking of my ego, or my being, or my soul, or my this, or my bleh. I make myself into an object for myself. And once I make like that, then we get into the realm of, oh, well, then it's always subject object. Subject and object are irresolvably split apart. Oh no. I think that like the typical materialist reading, or like a very common materialist reading, would be to say that the difference, if I was a material, I mean, I am a materialist Hegelian, but like if I were like a naive materialist Hegelian, I would say, oh, well, the difference itself in this irresolvable antagonism, which reintroduces asymmetry inevitably by sharpening the spears against each other, it has to be object, because I am an object. The whole world is a series of objects. This external productive set of forces gave rise to my being. I am substance because I'm made of, and this is where Neil deGrasse Tyson builds his entire legacy, is like, you're made of star stuff. Isn't that cool? Like, that's all he can say. That's like, and that's in like page 3 of this book. It's like, and this is from 1806. Like he's so anyway, my point is that the I think a different reading would be to say that it's not that the difference lies on the surface of substance, but that the difference lies on the surface of subject. I think that subject, in its relationship to the objective order, it sublates its otherness to the thing and unites itself to the thing. And the way that it does that is not through like fully understanding it and seeing the noumenal or reaching absolute knowing or something crazy. Well, I mean, in a way, that is what you do, but not absolute knowing as people think of it. When you think of absolute knowing, most people think of like, I know everything, absolutely. Or I know one thing, absolutely, you know, but it's not that. I'm going to quote from Sex and the Veiled Absolute. I'm just going to read a small passage from this book that I think really helps orient me when it comes to understanding Hegel's notion of negativity and the subject identifying with itself as its object. And that is, the subject recognizes its own flaw, i.e. lack, failure, limitation, etc., as grounded in the flaw, lack, failure, limitation, or rather imbalance, that pertains to the cosmic order itself. The fact that the subject cannot fully objectivize itself, that's me thinking about my ego, right, and trying to make sense of it. The fact that the subject cannot fully objectivize itself doesn't mean that it dwells somewhere outside the objective order like an epiphenomenon of nature. It means that this order is in itself incomplete, traversed by an impossibility, far from signaling reconciliation with defeat, such a position opens up new prospects for radical action grounded in the redoubling of lack. And I think at least that is how I recognize my being attaining some form of an identity with the thing, with objects. And so we have an identity in non-identity. There is an identity in shared negativity, in failure, in lack, in limitation, in impossibility. But anyway, yeah.
I have a quick question that may not have a quick answer, but another difficulty I'm having in this passage, which I assume is going to continue, is when he says subject. I'm not sure whether he is thinking of like literally human subjects, or if he's thinking more broadly than that. So, I mean, I'm wondering if this is one reason why he's sometimes called an idealist, but is subjectivity sort of in some sense, the ultimate ground of reality for Hegel, rather than just a collection of particular individual subjects?
I remember listening to a podcast, which I know that's not the greatest reputable source, just, you know, abstractly, but they made the point of mentioning that Hegel's idea of subject is not necessarily human, although he almost certainly had just humans in mind pretty much, but it doesn't necessarily have to be limited only to human subjectivity. I think he would see that maybe as something too particular and determinate for his idea of subject, which seems to be more on the side of a kind of universal that would probably go past that idea of just simply human subjectivity. So at least that's how I would answer that, but then hard to say. Yeah.
Here's my, I mean, this is me just speculating wildly, so you guys should probably shut this down, but you know, kind of was like I was writing in that, and maybe I'm thinking too much 20th century phenomenology, too much like Heidegger or Husserl or something. But what I wonder, you know, like in the 20th century phenomenological tradition, you could say that in some sense, there can be no being without there being subjectivity. Because there are only beings for subjects. You know, to talk about there being something without a subject just doesn't make any sense. And so, you know, what I think, like when Husserl at least thinks about that, he's not thinking in any kind of, well, I don't know. Anyway, I think he's thinking of individual subjects more. But I'm wondering, and this is again a speculation that maybe Hunter or somebody can shut down, is Hume suggesting, is Hegel suggesting that because there are beings, there is a sort of subjectivity in some sense undergirding all of existence? I want to resist. I mean, you know, what some of the things that make me ask questions like this are when he starts talking about, when he starts identifying God with spirit and stuff like that. I've read some, I haven't read a lot about Hegel, but I've read some recent stuff that's really trying to caution people against saying there's this cosmic consciousness, you know, that this cosmic God consciousness that's not that simple. But that this stuff makes me wonder if he does think that because there are objects, there has got to be some kind of ultimate subjectivity that is giving rise to objects. Or is it just a bunch of individuals who we each have our own subjectivity?
Actually, I have a pretty brief answer. Thank God. I think that the the way in which subject, if we could even say, well, first off, I think that negativity undergirds Hegel's notion of the like cosmos, and that subject is pure negativity. But if we can say, in whatever capacity we can say that subject undergirds reality or experience or whatever, it would be that, okay, so ordinary materialism, like I was critiquing just a second ago, ordinary materialism would say there is no inside without an outside. There is no internal world of beautiful souls without an external world of productive processes of atoms smashing into each other and producing life and nitrogen and oxygen and stuff. But then the dialectical materialist position would be to say, yes, that's true. But at the same time, there would be no exterior without an interior. To be a consistent whole in even at the most elementary level, not even like a consistent whole in the idea that it works and that it's like a beautiful flowing unity, like whatever, I don't know, Brahman or something. It's not like that, but for it to be even a workable term, the external, the world, the universe, whatever, for it to have even the most minimal symbolic existence, to be a consistent whole, reality has to be sutured in a way by subjectivity. And this suturing point is subjective intervention streaming into the fold, cutting in to the circularity, into the unity, the pure negativity coming in and disrupting everything, you know. And if we want to talk about that more, we can, but because I have some examples that I found actually already of just such a subjective intervention, but whatever.
When you talk about that negativity slicing in and so on,
yes.
that reminds me a bit of Sartre. Is that a bad connection? You know, I think, you know, consciousness being that kind of cuts into the density of being, you know, that kind of language. Is there any similarity there?
Well, honestly, I mean, I think a big critique that I've seen mounted against Sartre, which this is like, and you know, I used to be big into Sartre. He was my hero. He was my weird philosophical pseudo father figure for a little bit, you know, just like we all have when we're going from thinker to thinker, right? Anyway, I liked him, but I was super against, you know, all these hateful critiques of him that I saw. But one Hegelian critique that I totally agree with is that he employs Hegelian vocabulary and jargon and mechanics. He employs Hegelian tools in his system, in his conception of subjectivity and of the cosmos. And for example, and where this breaks down, he posits being in itself and being for itself, right? And those are kind of Hegelian terms. But he does not conceive of a mediating moment between the two. And Hegel doesn't either, really. All mediators vanish, but that mediating moment is already there. But Sartre did not focus on this as much. So, but anyway, the point that I wanted to make about the subjective thing cutting in, and then I'm going to pass the talking stick, is that, okay, to reach self-consciousness, I am only conscious of myself in a second person form. I am known, and an example of this is, I am known by another as blah, blah, blah. Or I think of myself as blah, blah, blah. I see myself, even when I'm conceiving of myself, I'm a second person thing. It's always this, and this is in psychoanalysis, the basic definition of identity within psychoanalysis is decentrament, is a decentered point. The very basic operation of identifying with something is to identify with it from a decentered point. So I am only conscious of myself in a second person form. And so self-consciousness is always already a 2-in-1, and Geist is just self-consciousness in its individual and social forms. And when we get into this social and individual form, we get into recognition. And to recognize another person, to recognize another as what they are, or for them to recognize me as what I am, or what I want to be, or whatever, to recognize me at all by any of my actualities, they have to have the authority to recognize. They need to be conferred the authority to recognize. And so okay, what authority do we recognize and what authority don't we recognize? Okay, well, if our solution to that is okay, avoid the arbitration. We can't say nothing has authority, because then it all falls apart. So then everything has to have authority. So all authority is recognized authority, right? Okay, great. Well, that runs into a problem, and it's that we get an infinite regress of authority, where who recognizes the authority of the person to recognize or confer authority onto this other person who has the authority to recognize, and so on into infinity. And so in this infinite regress, to avoid this, the infinite regress is interrupted by subjective intervention, a moment where somebody they have authority, that's it, period, full stop, no further discussion. It's like a child asking you, why is this? Why are there hot dogs on the spinner at 7-Eleven? Oh, because they get hot. Oh, why do they do that? Oh, because that's good to eat. Oh, why do we eat? And then at a certain point, it's just like, because I said so. I don't know. Shut up. And that is a classic example of another thing that I'm going to bring in a second. But so to avoid this, the infinite regress of the conferment of authority is interrupted by subjective intervention when somebody says, I have authority, that's it, period, full stop. And the master-slave dynamic emerges, and contradictions arise from that. But the moment that the master-slave emerges, that point of saying, period, full stop, because I said so, the bottom of our subjective investigating, that is what Lacan calls the master signifier. And there's a reason that he calls it the master signifier, because that's right where the master appears. That's where we start producing masters, is from this subjective intervention, cutting into analysis. And a good example of objective analysis being cut into by subjective intervention would be something like Stalinism. When Stalin was persecuting kulaks and needed to get this guy and that guy and this party of kulaks, there were rich peasants. Oh, let's persecute rich peasants. But then there were poor peasants who said, well, I kind of agree with the kulaks too. Get off my shit. And Stalin was like, okay, well, they're not kulaks technically, because they are not rich enough as peasants to be kulaks. Well, what do we call them? Okay, they're sub-kulaks. They're just anybody that even thinks like a kulak, that acts like a kulak, smells like a kulak, you're a sub-kulak. I don't care. Fuck you. And so the problem of objective analysis breaking down and being unable to account for all of the demands of the analysis, there comes in subjective intervention, which cuts across the whole fold of the problem. And so you could point to a sub-kulak who's a millionaire, or a sub-kulak who's never seen a penny. You know, it's this subjective intervention that says, you're a sub-kulak, period, full stop, get in the wagon, you're under arrest. That's it, you know, because I said so, I guess. But now Eric and Matt both want to speak.
I just wanted to quickly say after that. So first off, this in particularly, just as it seems to me that this system, as we're kind of talking about it, it seems similar like Kant when he's doing the, you know, almost this kind of reverse engineering where you're starting with, here's, you know, reality and then now I'm going to infer, you know, the component, or, you know, the categories or whatever from it. It seems like there's a similar thing going on with being or whatever, or the being in itself. And there's this, so it seems like everything that Hunter just laid out, I agree, or that makes sense. And it doesn't seem like it's, and maybe this is self-evident to everyone, but it's just interesting to me as we're talking about it. It seems like the way Hegel's discussing it is like, you know, it's not as if like, okay, when we're talking about the authority thing, it's not as if he's necessarily mapping out that there was even a conscious intentional decision to like ground authority in the way that we're talking about, but rather that that's just the logical foundations of the category as such. Like as you investigate it, it seems to imply that this is how the mechanism of authority is operating, that it can't go into a reductio absurdum and all that stuff. So it's interesting. There's this sort of abstract logic that's being applied to a realm of phenomena that is not abstract, I guess. It's very concrete what he's sort of investigating. So in that way, it is sort of a phenomenology, which then connects to what Nevitt was saying about Heidegger. At least for me, I see this, and maybe I'm just reading Heidegger into it, but I see a similarity, or maybe Heidegger's just drawing from Hegel or whatever, but I guess in his notion of Dasein, I mean, there seems to be differences too, especially when you get into the notion of authority and these kinds of things, but it does seem like there's a similarity in the notion of Dasein being like how there is like being itself, and then there's the being for which being is a question for it. It seems like there's something similar. Maybe this is just, it feels like there's something similar going on with Hegel. Maybe I'm wrong in terms of his conception of subjectivity. And then there was one other thing I was going to say, which is, well, I don't know, I've lost it. So maybe it'll come back to me, but I'll switch it off to other people. I gotta get this hand to go away. It's just like hanging out there.
I think that last point you made, Matthew, was golden. I think drawing, looking at what Heidegger had picked up from Hegel in terms of being a question for itself. Dasein is that entity for which being poses a unique problem, a question for itself. I think that very much informs Hegel's notion of subjectivity. And then also what you'd said earlier, I want to say in many ways, Hegel was very Kantian. He wanted, in many respects, he was more Kantian than Kant. He does disagree with Kant on several things, but on other things, and oftentimes his disagreement with Kant is like, you had a good insight, you just didn't follow it all the way through, and so I'm just going to come after you and follow it all the way through, and lo and behold, it kind of overturns some of your conclusions, but I'm doing it in the same spirit, so there are many ways where Hegel is Kantian. And to that note, I kind of jumped ahead. I've started reading the sequel a bit, and which is kind of like an exposition of the cat. It's like more than just an exposition. It's a deduction of the categories, where Kant's metaphysical deduction just took a lot as assumed. And that leads me to this point. I think I heard Hunter say just a few minutes ago, and again, I'm not a Hegel expert, so I might be a bit mistaken about this, but there's no mediator between in itself and for itself. But I just read it today in the sequel, that the limit, the concept of the limit is functions as a kind of mediation between being in itself and being for itself. But how exactly, I can't fully explain because I only read it today. It needs to sit with me a couple of days. And then I was just gonna throw this out there. I think, what Matthew was, saying there earlier, just, helps us elucidate, understand the notion of subjectivity as it's at work here in Nevitt. I wanted to speak to your question is this why Hegel's called an idealist? And I want to say no. And again, this is my limited understanding of Hegel so far. But I want to say for Hegel, subjectivity is a moment in consciousness on its way to absolute knowing. Subjectivity isn't absolute in itself. But what I understand Hegel's idealism to consist of is not in his prioritizing subjectivity over objectivity, but where he kind of begins with a logic, and I think where he kind of finishes with the phenomenology is a speculative unity of thinking and being. And that's what gives his idealism its name, right? Speculative unity of thinking and being, which isn't, again, it's not a unique Hegelian contribution to philosophy. I think that was, again, very much part of many earlier metaphysical thinkers. It's just that he gets to it through Kant, and overturns and problematizes a lot of the assumptions from the pre-critical, idea of the speculative unity of thinking and being.
You know,
Is it? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
all right, but yeah, you didn't have to answer this now, but I'm kind of curious about the distinctions that Hegel makes between. So I know he talks about the I, the just letter I, the self, and then the subject, and then there's also consciousness and then self-consciousness, but that kind of comes later, it seems like. So I think really the overarching thing for him is Geist, spirit, it seems like. So I think that kind of, and then subjectivity or the subject, I think that's more, was it Eric just saying this, that it's more probably just a kind of moment within spirit, but I think it's really that the movement of spirit, its development, that's kind of the real thing for him. I see kind of unifying all this stuff, unifying in its disunity or whatever, yeah.
I have a question on that, and I mean, yeah, completely naive question in that I'm so new to Hegel. But so then, is this spirit like almost like a non-local thing? Like it's something that's like kind of emanating from intersubjectivity like what is the way in which spirit can be said to be distinct from just subjectivity, I guess? Like what's the difference there?
I'm not totally sure about subjectivity, but I think so in terms of non-local and local, I think he would say that this also kind of goes into the whole thing about the universal and the particular and the concrete and all that. Is he says that there can't be just this abstract universal. I mean, there can, but that's just one kind of isolated moment that just you have to go on from that. So I think what he would say is that for there to be a proper, I'm not sure if this is the right term, concrete universal, it would have to be something that includes the particular, or there has to be some kind of access through the particular. So it has to include particular to really have a concrete, real, total universal. So I think he would say that spirit is both something that is non-local in the sense that it's always developing, it's always in a movement of development, but then so it's not local in that sense, but it also has locality in another sense, but that's always these kind of finite moments that it's sort of positing that it ultimately has to go past, it's to sublate them, transcend those. So I think he wants to say essentially it's both non-local and also local, and kind of that dialectic, of movement sort of through and past those would be more what he means by spirit. But once again, that's based off of my, well, maybe I think I understood like 99.9% now I'm thinking about it. So yeah, just saying.
I wanted to read this passage that I mentioned in the chat, or just the first few sentences of section 28 on page 18. It says, however, the task of leading the individual from his culturally eminent standpoint up to and into science had to be taken in its universal sense, and the universal individual, the world spirit, had to be examined in the development of its cultural education. With regard to the relationship between these two, each moment, as it achieves concrete form and its own figuration, appears in the universal individual. However, the particular individual is an incomplete spirit, a concrete shape whose entire existence falls into one determinateness, and in which the other features are only present as intermingling traits. So at least there's some connection there between the individual and the so-called world spirit. My vague understanding is that there are several different interpretations of what he means by world spirit. Is this some sort of pantheism, some sort of panentheism, or what? I'm not sure why. I tend to want to reduce reduce duality as much as possible and try to, I'm not sure why. Maybe it's just an aesthetic feeling on my own part, but I tend to want to move towards some sort of monistic ontology instead of dualistic. And so one way I'm wondering if, you can read this as this sort of universal individual or the world spirit is kind of the way things work, something like that. Like, this is the way reality moves. And then the particular individual, and if you want to call that God or not, I guess that's fine, but it's like the fundamental way things happen. I think rules is probably too specific, but it's the way reality moves. And then a particular subject is in a sense a manifestation of that, but it's an incomplete spirit because it's completely particularized. And so it can't manifest the fullness of that thing because it is grounded in the particulars of, this body with these features in this particular place, in this historical epoch, and so on. There's all these particularities. But nevertheless, it is, this individual is a manifestation of the way things happen in the universe. That's again, I am like as far as you can get from a Hegel scholar. So take all these with a giant rock of salt, but that's kind of my thoughts.
And to expound on that, the question I had, because I'm still very new to Hegel as well, is that the way I perceived him saying it was that negation was adaptive. It wasn't grounded in something that was absolute or finite. It almost had like quantum overtones, like it was able to point out the differences in something, but it was adaptive to the point where both of those states of being almost simultaneously existed. So is negation adaptive from his perspective?
I actually, Joseph, I think that's awesome. That's like a really cool point to bring up. Like that's because I think so. Like I guess I think that I would say yes. Negativity is adaptive in the sense that even a duality between like an opposition between a positive and a negative for Hegel. I think that negation can still work its way into like the formal framework that encapsulates both the positive and the negative. I think a way of saying this, I suppose, would be that I guess I see where people are coming from with like the subjectivity being like part of spirit, like a part of the movement of spirit. Like a subjectivity is a moment in spirit. I don't know if I'd say that, but what I think I can say is that subjectivity is pure negativity, and this is getting into the negativity's ability to adapt. So if we could just define spirit, it would be the it's like self-consciousness. Okay. So self-consciousness in its individual and its social forms. That is like the definition of spirit. And another way to say that same statement is that spirit is if I were to start listing concepts and using words trying to find spirit, I would be deploying concepts that are underneath the umbrella of spirit, right? Because that's like, you know, when I describe a horse, it's got hooves, it's got, you know, hairy legs, it's got, I'm not, you know, I'm describing things about the horse. So if I were to say things about spirit, I would find that all the things I say would add up to terms that outline the way in which a life can be satisfied. And when I say life, I mean living substance. And Hegel uses that phrase once or twice. But so a life, a particular life, just like a magnolia tree or whatever, can only be satisfied in certain ways under certain contexts. And this is getting into the Heideggerian Dasein thing. It's always thrown, it's always in a context, it's always born into a realm. And these conditions of satisfaction, i.e. spirit, are also present when we just state facts about the life in question. Like if you talk about me, you will be talking about the conditions of my satisfaction, and i.e. you will be talking about my spirit. This is where Hegel is saying that spirit is in the objective qualities of the thing. It's in the factual statements about the thing. So what makes spirit unique from among other life forms is its awareness of itself as a life form. And its awareness of itself as a life form means that it measures itself based on, I said subjectivity is pure negativity, but spirit is self-consciousness in its individual and social forms. I was just clarifying for a question that Nevitt just asked in the chat. So it measures itself by this concept. And it could theoretically reach this ultimately contradictory concept of itself, like, I'm gonna just be as avaricious as possible. I don't care. I'm gonna just smoke and drink and frick off. You know, that you dedicate yourself to that. And by the end of your doing that, or your end of dedicating yourself to realizing this concept that you hold yourself to, i.e. being a good proletariat, or being a hedonist, or being a this or a that or whatever, you ultimately come to the opposite of that. If you try to be altruistic, if you try to be avaricious, you find yourself falling into personal greed and desire, or at the other end, dedication to an imperative to be hedonistic. So you reach these ultimately contradictory concepts, and the spirit then changes the concept of itself when it reaches this contradiction by dipping into non-actuality, into negativity, by its confrontation with negativity that's constantly like, it's like a baseball bat hitting spirit in the face all the time as it's trying to think. And that's subjectivity. And so subjectivity is its own baseball bat that it's whacking into itself so that it can just reorient its own sort of thinking. It's assaulted by negativity. And then if this change of spirit is done perfectly, theoretically, it would become like true spirit. And the closest example that we have in human history to true spirit is the Greeks. And even the Greeks, as true spirits, excluded women and slaves from their true spirithood, and they developed a lust for glory. So even true spirithood falls to negativity, or maintains a negativity. So in that sense, I think that negativity is always present with spirit, but it is not the whole of spirit. That's what I'm willing to say. And I think that subjectivity being this unity, or not this unity, sorry, this negativity. I think that spirit, if I try to think of what my spirit is, it's my place in everything. It's my place of belonging within the greater order of all things, within social life and within the cosmos and whatever. And this is sort of like what people think of when they think of harmony and peace, and like Soto Zen meditation becoming like a wind instrument to the motions and contingencies of the world. It's spirit. That's what spirit is. But there's a caveat, and it's that I can never fully actualize or articulate that place. I can never reach or become or engage with that, my position in everything. And so spirit, while yes, it is this kind of unifying thing, its basic characteristic is to negate and to deny and to break apart and to create disunity. So, yeah.
Okay, so I have a okay, so this is from what you just said, this is the picture I'm getting. So I'm wanting people to tell me if I'm wrong or on to what you're saying, basically. I'm getting this image of so subjectivity being a negativity. I'm thinking like, if I look around right now, I am not any of the things that I'm seeing. Like, so there's this intentionality where I am defining myself. I mean, to the extent that I have a self-definition, it's that I am not what's immediately in front of me, or like my hand as I'm seeing it in front of me. Like, it's my hand, but it's almost like a virtual thing. Like I'm not the hand, and I'm not the colors around, blah blah blah. I'm like this inference of everything that I'm not. Like the almost like the shadow, or like when they do like screen prints or whatever, and they do like the inverted image that you have to like print. It's like that or something. And then okay, and then spirit is like the fact that there's this constellation of negative things that are they are not all of what's around them. Those subjectivities are like aligning in a kind of constellation that is sort of co-defining everything else. Like if I'm talking to my mother, it's like, the fact that she's my mother in a way is co-defined by the fact that I'm her son. Those are like in some kind of interpenetrating and interdefining relationship with each other. And then in a bigger picture, that spreads out to like all things. And does that feel like right, or what? Correct me if I'm not getting it.
So somewhat tangent, but a lot of what you're saying kind of those terms remind me of Merleau-Ponty. And actually a lot of this reading reminded me of that as well. And I wonder exactly what the influence is there, but that's kind of unrelated. So yeah. Okay, people are about to start talking very loudly here, so I'm going to.
I had a quick question about, I think, Nevi, you mentioned what the world spirit was, and you read that quote from section 28 on page 18. And I'm wondering if that's some kind of, I don't want to say knowledge, but I guess just to say something, I'll say knowledge. On the bottom, he has this kind of quote, which says, like in this pedagogical progression, we recognize the history of the cultural formation of the world, sketch and silhouette. The past existence has already become an acquired possession of the universal spirit. It constitutes the substance of the individual or his inorganic nature. In this respect, the cultural formation of the individual regarded from his own point of view consists in his acquiring all of this which is available, in his living off that inorganic nature, and in his taking possession of it for himself. Likewise, this is nothing but the universal spirit itself, or substance giving itself conscious, or its coming to be and its reflective turn into itself. So would this make the world spirit some kind of, I don't want to say knowledge, but just for the sake of saying something, I'll just say knowledge.
So here's my thought on that again. Just making this shit up. It could be completely wrong. I mean, this kind of makes me wonder if the world spirit is something like. I mean, I don't know how to integrate Hunter's description of the spirit as negativity into this, but as spirit as the movement which produces awareness or subjectivity or something of that sort. Because if you think about, culture as a manifestation of spirit, or as a type of spirit, I forgot what he calls that, objective spirit or something, that culture is a product of self-reflective consciousness that sticks around for a while. And so what I'm wondering is if what this isn't a definition, but kind of what one function of spirit is to produce, this business about returning into itself. And like James was reading at the very bottom of page 18, this is nothing but the universal spirit itself, or substance giving itself its self-consciousness, or its coming to be and its reflective return into itself. So that maybe spirit is the underlying whatever it is that produces self-reflective awareness, and in a really broad sense, including the products of self-reflective awareness like cultural artifacts, and then pedagogy, or the teaching becomes a feature, or is a manifestation, maybe a spirit, in the sense that it is the way through which we transmit these products of subjectivity from one generation to the next. And so that all of these things, personal subjectivity, personal creative products, cultural products, pedagogy, which aims to transmit and carry these through time, all of these things are, this is all speculative on my part, are evidence of the way spirit works to produce, knowing in the sense of self-reflective awareness is, that's what knows, right? What knows, what is it that knows something? Well, it's self-reflective consciousness that knows something. And so then all of these things are manifestations of the way spirit is working through the individuals and through history, producing these manifestations of subjectivity, again, some of which are these material products. When I talk about Hegel, I just sound like I'm just saying crazy, weird shit. So I don't know if that made any sense or not.
I guess I'm not certain I'm following exactly, but I wanted to check in and see, would it then make sense to sort of make draw like sort of a similarity here to I forget what the terminology is in Heidegger, but in terms of Husserl's notion of like a transcendental ego, would the world spirit have the same kind of universality of it, although it would obviously be different in that it wouldn't have the same sort of Kantian qualities of being sort of pre-established. It seems like in Hegel it would be regressive and it would like alter over time, basically, but would it have the same sort of qualities of being this sort of universal structure of subjectivity?
I want to say yes, but I'm afraid I would be wrong. But I also, my guess is, it seems like everyone after Kant wants to get rid of the noumena for sure, and then half of the people who react to him also want to get rid of the transcendental ego. And so, Husserl was okay with the transcendental ego, but I don't know that any of the, like Sartre wanted to get rid of it. I think probably Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty do. And so I think, but it does sound similar to me, like, spirit is, at least the functionally, like spirit is that which, that's why I wanted to say it's like the way the world works is something like the structuring principle of existence or something, and then part of it's, again, part of the way it works is by producing subjectivity and the products of subjectivity. So Matthew wants to speak.
Yeah, at least the image I'm getting, and again, open to like Hunter, whoever who's more knowledgeable to, but I'm getting this image of like a whirlpool is, if you look at a whirlpool, you see a shape there, but the shape's composed of all of these fleeting water molecules that are, traveling down the drain or whatever. And there's no actual, it's the constellation of all of these things in relation to each other. And there's no actual like substance that you could pull out, but you kind of can like infer it through almost everything that it's not, because it's all just like the pattern that's I don't know. So I'm almost seeing like the spirit being sort of similar. There's all these sort of fleeting subjective experiences, and all of those subjective experiences are being defined in a way by, the cultural milieu around. And maybe this is too Heideggerian, but at least that's, this kind of thrownness thing, right? So you're like, um, I'm thrust into a culture where there's Tom and Jerry and, the Simpsons. Like I just looked up and saw Tom and Jerry on the screen. So that's like, uh, there are all these concepts that that I understand myself in relation to, and some of them are more universal than others. There's like a spectrum of that universality to it, and and but we infer that which is spirit from. The last thing I'll say on that note is like, and I don't know how coherent this is, but it's like you go into a party, and maybe this is too colloquial use of the term, but there's a spirit of the party often. It's like if it's a wake, there's a spirit of mourning or whatever, and if it's a celebration, there's a and you kind of feel that energy when you go in, and it's sort of a feedback loop. It's like if I go into a party and everybody's happy, I'm going to feel hopefully more happy, right? And then I'm feeding into that energy, and it's kind of, but if I go into a place and someone just had a heart attack, or there's this vibe of like of anxiety or tension, you can feel that, and it's now your body is sort of like this antenna that's sort of reacting to that, and it's sort of feeding it. So it feels like the spirit. I don't know how much this is an analogy or like a localized example of it, but you scale that up to maybe that, I don't know, maybe I'm misusing it, but when you get into zeitgeist and stuff, it's like there are these yeah, that's the image I'm painting. People can refute that or go with it or whatever.
Yeah, Matt, I really like that example of the whirlpool and the party stuff. I'm wondering if, because like you said, you can't really take out that whirlpool. It's kind of there, and you can't really take out the spirit of the party either. So I'm wondering if the spirit is kind of like an event, right? It's something that kind of happens. You can't really take out the substance, or you can't separate it from that which it is a part of, because it's there, it's kind of embedded into it. So I'm wondering if that's a correct way to kind of maybe as an analogy think of the spirit as a kind of event that happens, or is this a kind of is this a misstep?
Yeah, no. I'm looking here too, and I'm seeing a couple of different ways the world soul is described as well. And one time I think it's described here is visible force advancing world history. And here I think it says here that Hegel describes Napoleon at one point as the world soul on horseback. So that's another interesting kind of description, like sort of a philosophical. That's the definition, but I'm not sure. I'm completely baffled by his use of the word. But
Well, you were breaking up a bit, but I think I got you bringing up Napoleon, the world soul, and maybe Hunter. I feel like he's talked to me about this world soul notion too. So, but at least from what I'm getting from, and the big picture of it is like there are these individuals who there's something about their existence, almost in a Heideggerian sense, like the way they are in the world, that is like this lightning rod for a culture or whatever, or like their subjectivity is being kind of like molded for this time in this place or something. Maybe that's an oversimplification, but I'll leave it there.
Okay, just to okay, so I think I just want to start by saying that I just to give some support to Matt's analogy about like the spirit of a party or the spirit of a wake or something, as to why that I think I agree with it, and like I just want to kind of justify my own like agreement with what Matt's saying by pointing to a thing that Hegel writes about later in the book. We're going to get to a chapter called Religion. And yeah, the spirit of St. Louis. That's ain't that the truth? That spirit of the party, of the event, of the whatever, that using spirit in that way, speaking of spirit in that way, I think that on one hand we could say, oh yeah, well that's not really accounting for like all these weird Hegelian mechanisms of spirit. You're just talking about a vibe, all right? That's one way you could react to it. But I think a different way would be to say, well, what else is going on in Hegel's chapter on religion? Okay, in Hegel's chapter on religion, he describes religion as like the first attempt for many at finding the essence behind appearance. And then he talks about how we deified a lot of things. In Zoroastrianism, we deified light. Then we were just doing life in general and like, plants and like Gaia and like pagan shit. And then we had like animal humans, like life, like a life in this creative, but more relatable way in animal humans in like ancient Egypt, in the religions of ancient Egypt and like African tribes. And then finally, we got to a point where our deities were just straight up people. And he says, that's Greece. That's Hellenistic mythology, is seeing the deity as subject or as humans, as people, Greeks were true spirits in a way, seeing beauty as one with truth. And Greek religion, and what that means, by the way, is that like the beautiful gods, these beautiful gods, they are like the truth of our life. It's like we look at this beautiful art of these beautiful gods, beautiful people doing beautiful things. And that is, for them, the truth of our actual immanent existence. So Greek religion finds the essence behind appearance to be subjectivity, to be a subject, But the problem is that this is still an aesthetic solution to a real problem. The real problem being the split between essence and appearance and the striving to know. The subject of Camus' book, The Myth of Sisyphus, the absurd, the conflict between the desiring man of knowledge and the world's unreasonable silence. If Greece had really figured it out, then there wouldn't be any continuing of that. But I think that Hegel further posits that in Christ, it's in the myth of Christ, even if it's a myth or if it happened or whatever. In the story of Christ, the divine is not just an aesthetic reference to a subject. It is a subject. He is a man. He was just a man. And this is getting into where Matt showed me some quotes from G.K. Chesterton, who said that Christianity is one of the only religions ever to exist where God himself was, at least for a moment, an atheist. A subject capable of and engaging in radical doubt. And there's a part throughout the Phenomenology when we get to infinity, he's gonna talk about like reaching a place of infinite doubt and then doubting infinite doubt. We're just really good at that. We just hate everything, it seems. We're just ready to doubt whatever. So, but the point of what I'm saying is that once we can kind of formalize this Christ as the divine subject, Hegel opens up a discussion of the community of believers, and the community of believers are people united in faith, presumably under Christ, like under a Christian God. But I mean, that's not totally necessary to be a community of believers sui generis. But a community of believers nonetheless is united as fellow believers and not merely by rules. Hegel is very critical of rules and rule making. And he says that rules are the defining principle or character of life for alienated spirits. He says that if you're an alienated spirit, the only thing that you have to cling to is rules that tell you what to do. But if you're in a community of believers and you're an actual believer, you are not united to your fellow believers through a set of oppressive rules. You're united to them in common belief. You're actually in a community with them, as opposed to being imposed upon and forced into this community. And this community of believers establishes a universal self-conscious. And that kind of produces the end point of Hegel's formula that God is present among us as Geist, as spirit, which sounds very traditionally Christian. But in that sense, the spirit of the community of believers is the important thing, just like the spirit of the wake and the spirit of the party. You know, people aren't getting together and crying over their lost loved one because somebody told them to, because their dad forced them to come to the wedding or to the funeral, and or whatever stupid event you have that demands some sort of social gathering. It's not that everybody's there because they have to be. They're there. Some of them are there because they have to be, but they're there because they feel something. I feel sadness. I feel mourning. I want to pay my respects. I'm here united in common belief with other people, and we establish a universal self-consciousness. But yeah.
I thought there was something interesting that you said while explaining Christianity and this communion of believers, where you made a distinction between the alienated subject with rules versus this community of believers. And it seems that this community of believers who don't have rules need to alienate themselves to some extent, where they're giving themselves up, or their individuality, perhaps. Let's see, I was reminded because I've been reading, starting with Hegel by Craig Matarez. I butchered that, and he makes that distinction. And in the German, there are two different words: the alienation that you feel usually when we use the term, and then when you alienate yourself, right? Like between lovers, you give something up to the lover sometimes, and you take on their mannerisms, etc. And then there's this freedom that comes from that. Just thought that was interesting.
Hello. I've been kind of going over this passage about the world spirit, and I think one of the things that is that is great about Hegel, at least from what I can see so far, is that we can't define spirit or the world spirit in any very specific ways, or equate it to something else. But the sense that I'm getting is that the world spirit is kind of like, if spirit is sort of like our feelings towards our place in the world, or our relationship to the way we see ourselves and all, and we could define it in all these different ways. The world spirit is the part of that spirit which we no longer feel, which like kind of enters the background. We become familiar with it and we accept it, but we're no longer feeling it, and we're not recognizing perhaps the effects of what that has. So basically he talks about how, like, hold on, I'm on the wrong page. He has this idea of like higher levels of spirit, and he seems to imply that the world spirit is lower than the individual spirit, and that the world spirit is sort of similar. Like he's kind of implying that the world spirit is sort of like history, that like we sort of, in the same way that we can't relate to history. Like we know history is going on right now, but we don't think of it as history until it's in a history book, or until it's something that is no longer like, we don't have feelings towards it. It becomes this sort of unfeeling thing that we're familiar with, that is constantly in the background, that we use to define whatever we're doing, but we no longer feel it. And perhaps this is the exact reason that history repeats itself, is that it is tiring to feel history. When horrible things happen, we feel them, but we can't continue to feel them. We kind of have to give up, or we have to lower our feelings. And the more we separate our feelings from the spirit, the more we are likely to repeat it. And so this world spirit becomes what he seems to define as these like ground that we keep returning to, like we can't escape. And so we're in this sort of circle where we keep returning to the world spirit, and spirit becomes the process of the circle, like how we kind of return to it, and how what we feel when we return to it, this process. So like, in terms of this funeral or whatever, I'm inclined to kind of say like, okay, yeah, spirit would be us entering this and feeling kind of this this feeling of like, oh, we should be sad. This is kind of what we should do. But I think the point in which it turns into a sort of world spirit or a non-individual spirit is when we start seeing it as this necessary thing that we can't do anything with, and we start seeing everyone in our life die. And then suddenly we're just distraught over this fact that everyone around us is dying and we will die soon, and we become obsessed. So there's not like an individual spirit growing and thinking and developing these ideas about death, but rather it becomes this concrete thing that we can't escape from, that we keep returning to. And and much in the way in which we think, there are these thought loops or these things where we return to, so I don't know, it's hard to define these things specifically, but I guess these are sort of the experiences that I think about, and so the world spirit is just this, and I think we have to do that. Like we have to we can't feel everything. So we have to make decisions about what we feel about, or what we feel, and how much we feel, and what things we feel towards. So the world spirit is like we can't escape it, but rather we can sort of interact with it, and use this circle in different ways, and try and creatively make these sort of feelings something new, or utilize them. And I don't know if Hegel really has any sort of like prescription or you should do this. I think at least right now he's just kind of talking about what these things are, but yeah, that's kind of my understanding of the world spirit.
On that, I see, I don't know how much this lines up with what you're suggesting or not, but I see the world spirit as we're discussing it. I mean, I like the notion of saying it's basically history, and that seems right. And I mean, I'm just trying to think about it with things nowadays. So I'm thinking with, so in general, we take for granted kind of a fish in water, not recognizing the water they're in. Maybe that's like a condition of our experience. But then there are times I was just thinking, like when, for instance, when Trump gets elected, like the first time, it's like this radical moment of disruption where you're just like, whatever your perspective politically, there's some basic innate sense that this is like not politics as usual. Something strange is happening. It's sort of a Rorschach test that can be interpreted in so many different ways, and that seems like part of what makes it like I feel like I can say right now with some confidence that the election of Donald Trump, whatever it meant, we still are kind of unpacking what that meant, but I can say that feels like a more historical moment than that they passed, this bill in Iowa like 3 days ago. Like that's, like in some way I can, or 9/11, like there's certain events that happen that are so significant even as they're happening that you feel inside of you this internal compass that's able to distinguish I might not know exactly what the historical meaning of this is, but I can tell it's history and not just like a random mutation that's, you know, you can almost make an analogy to like biological mutation. There's like, as a species is going, it's like firing off all these mutations. So many of them die out, you know, but then every now and then there's something that matches a niche in the environment and like sustains itself. It feels like I guess I'm saying like every day there's so many events that are happening in the world, and then there's only a fair amount of them that actually translate into history that we remember. And so I guess I'm just trying to relate that to this notion of like Napoleon. Like obviously when Hegel was alive, he saw Napoleon as like a world historical figure. I'm just trying to, I don't know, it seems like even though we're limited in our experience and there's so many things that we don't know, there's some way in which we can intuit that something, maybe Hegel would say that we can intuit to some extent that some figures are world historical figures, even if we're not able to precisely explain how or why or how they fit into a bigger picture or something.
I just want to say real quick. I think yeah, I agree with that. I think that there are certain individuals that we can come across that that point to the already present world spirit in a way that is kind of direct and in our finite thoughts and determinations. Is the word magnanimous? Just like sublime. Trump, Kim Jong-il, Napoleon, these people that it's like, and certain people, certain modern Hegelian scholars that I know of consider Xi Jinping to be a world spirit. This individual that is like not only set on changing the world, but has the means to do so. And no matter what you think about him, it's like the kind of person, the kind of individual subject that's present within the zeitgeist that everybody can look at and say, hey, love him or hate him, he's doing crazy stuff. He's really going ham. He's really going hard. He's doing his thing. That's awesome. I hate him or I love him, but whatever the case, he is really doing it. But I think that person as the world soul, as an engine of the world soul, I think that one could still say that the place that they have within the world soul is completely indeterminate. And Napoleon could have fizzled out and just been, Hegel, I saw this, he's the world soul on a horse. That's incredible. And then the next day he gets killed or by like tetanus or something. And then everybody forgets about him. It's like, there's this totally contingent character to individuals, but there is, no matter what, this world soul that develops kind of interwoven into our experience. And so I think both points are correct, that like, yeah, we definitely feel certain people that are definitely like, that guy's a world soul, but I think that can only come about in a position where we have no idea who's the next world soul, but go ahead.
Well, just on that, I was going to say, or when you were saying the thing about Napoleon could fizzle out, I was thinking maybe something about a world soul is that their identity and their, being in the world in a Heideggerian way is something which almost retroactively, I guess you could say like that where even the contingent elements of their existence, like when they die and these things they have no control over, in some way, and then will get sucked into this narrative about who they are, what they're all about. So I'm thinking even like Martin Luther King Jr. being killed, there's something, I don't know to what extent he's a world soul or whatever, but there's something where even his death is part of the narrative we tell ourselves about him and helps to, give his life meaning, rather, and same with Napoleon. Like if he got when he's doing his thing the way he was doing it, then him getting, murdered in a battle would mean something. And it depends on the context of the battle, or like Hitler shooting himself in the head sort of like has this existential meaning when you hear the story that feels like it's saying something about Hitler, it's saying something about Nazi Germany, it's saying something about the way the world ended, all at the same time, like in this moment of just like this pathetic suicide, this madman that's like devoured the world, burning down. I guess there are conspiracy theories they didn't actually die, so who knows? But even those conspiracy theories are like marginal narratives that are enabling the main narrative that we all kind of ascribe to, whether it's 100% true or not. I don't know. I'm kind of going down to the weeds. I'm gonna shut up now.
Just because I'm gonna say a few things super quick again. First off, I just had a thought that made me kind of think about, because I'm actually interested in this notion of the soul, of Geist versus the Weltgeist, the spirit versus the world spirit. Because now I'm thinking, like, was George Floyd a world spirit, or Derek Chauvin, the man who murdered him? But anyway, I don't even know. That's just me. That's food for thought. But okay. So people were asking about edification in the chat and like in general, and I just want to make a point that I think is in agreement with what Travis was saying and still kind of furthering my earlier point about the world spirit. So in this preface, Hegel says people don't want insight from philosophy; they want edification, and what that means is not the truth of the insight of the philosophy, but of a structured system of terms and of results and of statements of process and of intent. These finite results of an effort that we take apart in an edifice. Edification is the development of an overarching systematization of content. And people, according to Hegel, people don't want insight into that content. They want an edification of that content, a systematization of that content, something that makes sense of it all. And so he says, well, others fight against edification, but they seek only the feeling of substantiality returning to Geist. So he says some people are all about edification, and then other people are like, hey, you're totally missing the point, dude. It's not about edifices. It's about the vibes. It's about feeling cool and talking about like philosophy stuff and experiencing the feeling of substantiality returning to Geist. Isn't that cool? Like, we can just do that by taking nitrous and I can feel the substantiality of my Geist return. But Hegel is like, okay, first off, I'm just going to de facto deny the edification thing. I think that's lacking insight. That's my first problem. And then he says, on to the people who fight edification from this other standpoint of immanence and feelings and intuition and substantiality returning to Geist. He says, one can find just that sort of feeling. If somebody wants to, they can find that feeling pretty much wherever they please. And this reminds me of Borges, of Jorge Luis Borges had a story, I think it was called The Library. I don't know, but Travis in a private conversation with me said like a genuinely perspective altering thing to me once when he was like, we were talking about that story and he was like, yeah, the whole point of the story is that a man looks through a library, he enters the library, and the guy that runs the library says, oh yeah, God's in here in one of these letters, in one of these books. It's like 1 million books and there's like 1 billion letters, but it's somewhere in there. Go find him. And the guy's like, I gotta find God. He's one of these letters in one of these books. And he reads every single book and he reaches the very last letter of the very last book. And he's like, that's it. I did it. I found God. And Travis was talking to me about this and he was like, I think that the point of that story is that like the only reason that he found God there was because it was the last place to find God and he hadn't found it elsewhere. Like, and this was the thing that he said that I really like appreciated. It was love and God and the sublime and the absolute and whatever. Most of the time, it's just the thing that we call that. It's whatever thing is in front of us that we decide to call it that. Like we can find God and love and whatever, wherever. It's just like the place that we're going to find love and God is just wherever we've decided that we've already found it. you know, and we've decided that's God, you know, and I think that that's similar to world souls. It's like we can find this world soul returning and launching us into progress. Finally, Xi Jinping is going to overcome the West. Finally, yes, the world soul is here. Yeah, and like that's just I'm just looking for it, and I found it because I was looking for it, you know, and on the note of history, just to further, I think, agree with a lot of the things that Travis and Matt were saying. So absolute knowing is spirit knowing itself as it is in and for itself. Self-conscious life is having the form of self-consciousness in all of our activities. And so that is spirit knowing itself as it is in and for itself. So Geist is not the hidden essence behind appearance, but Geist, soul, spirit, is the series of appearances as it has shape-shifted through history. And so if we're going to conduct a phenomenology of spirit, it would be an account of all of its contingencies through history and how its concept of itself has shaped itself. And the end result of that sort of investigation is to say two phrases. One, all I know is that I know nothing. And second, the only thing that we learn from history is that we learn nothing from history. And that, I think, is like part of the basic character of absolute knowing, a knowing that produces or provides no new knowledge. I think that's the structure of absolute knowing, is providing no new information. And he says, now that we've reached absolute knowing, we can begin the system. And that's where he opens up science of logic. But anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I wanted to just jump right on what people were saying about the world soul or something like that. I wanted to add, 'cause I don't know if this might be relevant to like history and stuff, but on page 18 on section 28, near like the middle of that paragraph, it says that the individual whose substance is spirit standing at the higher level runs through these past forms in the way that a person who takes up a higher science goes through those preparatory studies which he has long ago internalized in order to make their content current before him. He calls them to mind without having his interest linger upon them. In that way, each individual spirit also runs through the culturally formative stages of the universal spirit, but it runs through them as shapes which spirit has already laid aside as stages on a path that has been worked out and leveled out in the same way that we see fragments of knowledge which enter earlier ages occupied men of mature minds now sink to the level of exercises and even that of games for children. So I was wondering if this kind of spirit is like kind of like a pedagogical like building up to where we see these complex kind of formulas like Pythagorean's theorem, Einstein's equal E equals mc squared, and those are just like common things that we all just kind of get now, but they required all this kind of intense labor, to create them. I'm wondering if that might be like an addition to this kind of world spirit, is this kind of pedagogical or maybe even epistemological building of these concepts or something like that.
Well, I guess I just to, I don't know, we're kind of running out of time, but I think, he's kind of decrying that, that reading of spirit as being like a progression, as like, because I think he's not like and like you were just saying, like he's certainly not psyched about people looking at like the things that concerned Plato and Aristotle to the end of their life, to the ultimate degree where they found their meaning and their passion, their highest hopes and their lowest failures have been reduced to like a chapter in intro textbook to a pre-1600s philosophy history class, and it's or like to a bit like if I'm telling a little 6-year-old, if I'm like, hey, philosophy's kind of cool. You got these Greek guys with beards who talk about, shapes. That's kind of cool. It's like, okay, is that really what they deserve? Is that really and it's not just because it's like, they demand more respect. Damn it. It's not like you need to respect the authority of philosophy. Damn it. It's that those things are not they are not just stepping stones on a path of progress. It's not a teleological unfolding towards some ultimate end. It's yeah. Hey, by the way, just to clarify, I appreciate your video of the Atlanta Botanical Gardens chase, but my basic point, just and then we're done, is because I say so, is that. See, that's what he's talking about in that plant thing. Is like we could see each stage of the plant viciously murdering the past form of the plant, but that would be kind of a weird way to look at what plants do. And for me to go to bed and think I am going to rob a bank tomorrow, and then I wake up the next morning and I think I've decided not to rob that bank anymore, or commit this heinous act of indecency, whatever it is. It's not that I mean, a part, you could say I killed that part of myself that wanted to commit that heinous injustice, but it would also be kind of strange to think that I died, I was killed and overcome by this new and better version, this greater, more evolved form of myself that I'm evolving with each day. As I change, I am always evolving into something better, you know. And so the thing that unites all of the different forms of spirit is spirit, but not in the sense that it is an originary or ultimate or immanent unity. It's not the hidden essence behind appearance that's holding it all together. Spirit is not the hidden little essence that's making it all function. It's not that at all. It is the series of appearances that shapeshifts. It's not the unifying principle of all those appearances. It is those appearances. And those appearances are transitory and inconsistent and not able to be trusted. And Hegel's response would be, yes, that is how the world is. It's like the old okay, we can cap this off with a joke from the Soviet Union. A famous Soviet Jewish citizen saw the terrors approaching in the 1920s and was like, oh my God, they're about to start. I've seen this before. And I feel, being like a Jew and being no stranger to being alienated and persecuted under stress by a state apparatus, things are about to get dicey. I need to get the hell out of here. And so he goes to the embassy and he says, I would like a passport out of the Soviet Union and to go to like France or something. And they said, whoa, brother, comrade, what's wrong? This is so crazy. What do you mean? Don't you understand? The Soviet dream is going to live forever. There's no need to run away. It's okay. The Soviet dream will live on forever. And his response is, yes, that is precisely why I need to leave. That is exactly my reasoning for leaving. And he's like, oh shit. So and then Zizek has this joke where he's like, let's imagine like a Kantian student talking to a Hegelian professor. And the professor says that Geist is the series of appearances. It's immanent. It's right there. And then the student says, but professor, the world is transient and transitory, and forms and objects shift and obscure, and our senses are so unreliable, and the things in front of us are so unreliable, so constantly in a state of decay and change and transformation. How could we possibly see this immanent spirit within it? And the Hegelian professor's answer is yes. Reality, not just in our experience of it, but reality as it is objectively present, reality as it is perceived by us, by our finite understanding, and reality as it is Geist. That is precisely why we should defer. to these appearances because they are so transitory and so shifting, you know. And so a phenomenology of that spirit would imply a total like an account of all of the contingencies of spirit through history. And that's like nigh impossible, but we can get kind of close, or at least we can conceive of it theoretically, and therefore we can theoretically conceive of something like absolute knowing. But yeah, that is, which I genuinely, I don't know if we can ever actually achieve absolute knowing, because I think that it as a notion itself is kind of self-contradictory. But hey, what ain't these days? You know what I'm saying? All right, that's it. That's my time.
So it's a little after 7. Should we, is there any burning comment anyone needs to make before we adjourn? Okay.
No, this has been really, I just appreciate everybody's time and participating. This has been very educational. So thank you all. Appreciate you.
We're very happy to have you here, and anyone else who is willing to take the suffering.
And thank you, Joseph. Thank you.
So I guess we'll see you next time then.
All right, take care.
Same link every week. So bye-bye.
Bye. Love you all. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.